Welcome to Future Commerce Podcast at the intersection of culture and commerce. I'm Philip.
I'm Brian.
And today we have a very special guest. Andjelic is a global brand executive and the author of books like The Business of Aspiration. And today we are going to cover her next big hit. It's called Hitmakers. Hitmakers, how brands influence culture. It's out today from Routledge, and we're going to get into it. And this is a big moment for us, Brian. We've been talking about Anna for ages.
I know. I can't believe we got her. I'm so excited.
And welcome to the show, Anna. And for those who aren't already acquainted, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us your CV and tell us what you've been up to, what you're working on.
A combination of things, which is, I guess, always good to be a polymath these days. So I have a PhD in sociology, where I studied sociology of innovation, but have always been focused on brands and brand building and how that practice evolved over years. Worked at digital agencies, worked at creative agencies, and then focused on luxury fashion lifestyle practice, and went brand side with the chief brand officer job at Rebecca Minkoff, then Mansour Gabriel, Banana Republic, and Esprit. I wrote 2 books. The first one, The Business of Aspiration, in 2020, and now the second one in December 24, Hitmakers, How Brands Influence Culture.
Right here.
Run a newsletter, Sociology of Business, every Monday that Phil referenced. I hope you were talking about me, about the newsletter. Sure. And and then also work a lot. I have a lot of advisory roles, a lot of consulting roles with clients as varied as technology, CPG, footwear.
I'm so excited to get into your new book here today, and I'll show it here for the YouTube. It is called Hitmakers: How Brands Influence Culture, and you had a short run podcast of the same name for a bit. Is that right?
Yeah, because we wanted to create a world, as you as we talked a little bit before, probably off the record, is basically how can we capitalize on this moment when there is a book coming out. There are a lot of book launch events. There was one in Paris. There is one upcoming in London next Friday, hosted by Liz. The one in Paris was hosted by Vivendi. There are like New York ones. There is Australia ones. So it's kind of like it became a little moment. So in addition to it becoming a moment in time, we were like, how can we give it space in a sense to unpack some of the things that are not in the book, because I wrote them later on, but that are also belong to the same sort of Hitmakers universe. So that is the idea of the 10 episode podcast arc that is with Hitmakers, and probably after the 10 episodes it's going to be a break. I'm going to do something else with someone else, and we'll see how it goes.
Can't wait to see what that looks like too. And this is the book out from Routledge right now, and you can get it on Amazon or anywhere. And I love it. I've read it twice. Looking forward to talking about it. And Brian, you got into this too. It gets into some stuff you really jam on.
I see a lot of Post-it notes there.
Yeah. Well, I this is how I consume stuff, especially when I'm going to interview an author. I'm like, you sort of, I tear books apart a bit. Yeah.
I read it on Kindle, which is a little embarrassing. I actually prefer paper typically, but it was a busy few weeks, and I know that everyone here listening to the show probably also had a couple of busy weeks with NRF going on. The thing that Philip was referring to, I think you really dive into storytelling as a part of this, building brands. You even said without stories, there are no brands. That I completely agree with. It's interesting. Everything we do in brand is actually like it's made up. It's like not real. These are stories. We make these. We build things around narratives that are myths in many ways. And so I'd love to kind of just maybe to open things up, and I want to get into your experience applying a lot of your thought processes that are in the book to brand. And Philip mentioned. We love one of those. That would be Banana Republic and the work you did with them. But I just, maybe you could kick things off just by defining what story means to you, and like how story is so connected to brand.
First, what stories mean to me is like we as human beings, we never make decisions in isolation from each other. We are always influenced by what we read, what we see, what we listen to, each other. So, in a sense, all of those interactions are narratives, or they're fibers of the narrative, and without getting, too crazy in metaphors, it's literally like how something becomes a trend, how does something influence become something that people are talking about, is because a lot of people are talking about. So basically, narratives are made of things people talk about, stories are made of many participants. It's not one to many, it's many contributing at all times. Just look at TikTok, look at Instagram Reels, YouTube. It's kind of like stories, and even this, like podcasts, we are happening at the same time. But then for this to really become a cultural story, a trend, a zeitgeist, you have a lot of people who are talking about similar things that we are talking about here.
Mm.
So, in a sense, that I would say the story culture is a story. It's a story that we tell ourselves to make sense of the world, to explain the world, to explain our place in the world, our relationship to others, to understand where we are sitting within that entire system of relationships. And then brands are stories that are part of this mega story. So the best
Yes.
brands really contribute to this mega narrative. Coca-Cola happiness, Apple creativity, Nike running, they get to own part of culture. So now
Yeah.
what I think is the best stories are those that are subcultural stories, that are more micro stories, that can identify one specific emotion and one specific part of culture and really, really, really own that. And you see that with Liquid Death, for example. You see that
Mm.
with Tracksmith, for example. You see at the end of the day with Banana Republic.
And those are all resonant with me personally. And so I think what's an interesting so hitmaker is a really specific term. So a hit maker to me, sort of, I was a musician in former life, and I think of myself, a hit maker is sort of like a Quincy Jones. Like there's somebody who had a specific form of a taste, who could maybe like a producer minded person who could recognize talent, or weave together a series of sounds, or produce a series of collective sounds, or weave together uh, a series of hits that creates culture and makes it sustain beyond a moment into like a generational impact. And it sounds like that's kind of what, not only have you, I think, said that explicitly in the book, but you've actually sort of outlined how brands do that. So hitmakers, you've actually said that, like, it's not just that this is incumbent on something that maybe musicians or other cultural exports that humans do is in form of like artistry. It's that maybe that's also like brands can do that too. And you've outlined that there's, it's not just that brands that we buy do that, is that there's other kinds of hit makers now in the modern era. It sounds like there's curators and new creators and creator collectives have a role to play in the future here as well. So maybe you could talk about this idea of hitmakers and how that formed and why you decided to write about it.
Yes, I'm going to start by saying that that's not an original name. As you said, there are
Mm,
music podcasts called Hitmakers. There is specific meaning. There is a Derek Thompson book called Hitmakers.
sure, sure.
The idea was really to capture that vibe, that energy, that atmosphere, and seeing how brands influence culture.
Mm,
That means some brands become hits, some brands' products become hits, some brand campaigns become hits. As we know, throughout the history, in the 80s, there are Jordans with Michael Jordan and Nike. In the 90s, with Britney Spears and Pepsi. So they were like just these big cultural moments that were just massive, massive hits. But then as we went to 2000s, 2010s, 2020s, my main question is, can we reverse engineer hit making in a sense? Can we say we cannot produce anymore those massive hits because cultural environments, culture and industries markets are incredibly unpredictable because
Hmm.
they rely on social influence, things that how we influence each other, so you can never know which way something is going to go. Like look at the bread summer, for example. It completely
Sure.
exploded, but it was very much considered and strategically designed with IRL URL combo to make it go as far and as fast as possible. But
Hmm.
what you see on like TikTok trends, micro trends, there is nothing but micro trends these days. Sometimes things bubble up and they capture imagination of culture, of pop culture at large, global pop culture, but then they last for a really short time. So that is the whole premise of my book. In that environment, how do you really set yourself up to influence culture? Because that's brands, again, if we say the brands are stories that exert their influence through their story, how strong is their story, number one. And the second, what is their strategy, how they tell that story. What do they use? Do they use their products? Do they use campaigns? Do they use merch, collaborations, experiences, real-time events, spaces, the
Hmm.
archivery issues, their own past, intellectual property? Sort of the toolbox has expanded. And then the third part then is like, yes, if you can't really know what is going to work, better strategy is to release a lot of different things and see which one is gaining traction and use your media buying and adjust your media plan in a way that it amplifies it. And so that is not easy because the traditional media plans are done at the beginning of the year, they're done quarterly, it's pretty much outlined, the entire years are outlined in advance, you can change only
Yeah.
small things. So then it's really the question, what does the hit making organization look like?
Hmm.
How do you organize yourself to be nimble and responsive? In a sense, like you say, hey, this merge drop is doing so well. Let's find some paid social to support it, or let's do additional gifting, or let's make sure that we introduce it in our next campaign, and so on. So basically, what I when I say that, and I say, hey, in order to do it like that, it's best to kind of outline your marketing strategy as a strategy of cultural influence. So you do an annual plan when everything is connected with everything else. So every single activation, every single cultural product basically builds upon and amplifies.
Hearing you explain it this way gives me a much greater sense of the scale, um, than what I took from just reading it, because I now have a sense of why you contextualize it against the emergence of LVMH as a holdco.
Mhm.
Because to me, the context of a creative collective like Mischief, being able to constantly have its constant creative production, feels very similar to a hedge, in the same way that LVMH has constant creative production because of its brand's constant scale. All of its brands are constantly producing at scale because LVMH is constantly producing at scale, because every brand has its constant production at scale. And that's a really interesting. So you have the micro model and the macro model. And I think that that's such a uh, uh, it feels very much like uh, uh, profoundly modern, where the world is both uh, it's the macro and the micro happening at the same time, and they mirror each other. That feels like a perfect example of like that is the modern world all at once. So I that just kind of snapped into place for me. I don't is that sort of an accurate? I just got that. You didn't say that directly, but that's sort of what I took from what you just
Look,
said.
I think that like my intention is always for people to take what is the most useful for them. So a lot of
Mm,
people are going to have different associations and examples, and
hmm
I mean, you took it in direction that's relevant for you. But absolutely, I mean, why not?
hmm
What do you think, Brian?
Good question. I do think there's this element, Philip, that you were just mentioning there, where you're feeling everything happening all the time at once, where it's like
Right.
constant. And you actually even sort of referred to this earlier on the idea that everything is like many people contributing all at one time. And we had Yancey Strickler on the podcast not too long ago now, and he said the future he saw it as many to many, and I believe that is exactly what we're experiencing right now. And as a result, you are getting micro and macro at the same time. Things are bubbling their way up. The thing that I think is really interesting and difficult to discern, and I felt this tension in your book, is we're now in the attention economy, and we're judging things based on attention, and so you talk about engineering sort of these hits and reverse engineering them, I should say, and there's this really difficult tension between doing something that you know is a good story, but may not garner immediate attention. And I think you even referenced a couple of brands who said, "We don't care. We're going to tell the stories we want to tell," and then as a result,
Mm,
the impact isn't necessarily brat, right? It doesn't happen now, but it's in 10 years from now, people are going to look back and say, wow, they knew how to tell a story. And
yeah.
then the financial impact will hit. How do you balance that?
Well, I honestly, I do think that very soon, thanks to AI, we'll be able to really connect the sales, the timeline horizons, and the actions that we do in culture. Because honestly, social influence has more to do with engineering, with information cascades, with the structure of the network, with the number of nodes, which how information then it is what we talk about culture. It's really how do you
Hmm.
make those models of social influence. So imagine AI doing that unbelievably quickly at unbelievable scale. So then you would have things like give me a movie that was not a success when it was released.
Clue is a good example, or
There you go.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that was took years to become, but
sure.
then it got a cult following.
Yep.
It was revived, and it then got financial, success and so on. So it's kind of all looking at well, things that succeed are those that really are aligned with the zeitgeist. And what I said,
Hmm
the zeitgeist is a lot of people talking about the sort of similar same thing. And when you do something that's either mega original, so it doesn't really fit, or it's outside in some other way, or it's not distributed, so with enough power of money behind it, then it kind of gets the life of the own when it can go into obscurity or it can be revived according to certain timeline. So I'll give you an example from business world. At Banana, when we did the rebrand, we did it very quickly in the 9 months, and then it was the new aesthetic, the new product, the new website design, the new visual merchandising, the new campaign. Everything was very consistent and it was very like from 0 to 1, very fresh. So that is what you do to influence culture. But then we looked when is the revenue going to hit? Because revenue is the lagging indicator of brand.
Yeah.
Right.
And it hit 3 months later, 1 quarter. From
Hmm.
September, it was in January, and it was 24% year on year comparable sales growth, which was amazing. So it's like, great. People respond really well. We hit into something in culture. They're liking it. It's a very consistent world, and we are seeing results. Sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 6 months. But I do think that now we will be with AI, we will be able to predict the actions, the money you put behind them, and then the impact on sales they're gonna have.
You had this. I've queued up for next week right before the show actually comes out, like a ton of social quotes. I've like highlighted a million things. Um, uh, despite this, a quote from the book: "Despite all of the reverence for the past, the creative economy is ultimately disrespectful of it. The past that the creative economy exploits had once been the future." And I think that that's, to me, and originality was such that it broke the confines of its present. Um, how did you treat the archive at Banana with such reverence, and do that in 9 months, while still trying to figure out how you
It
would
was not
find?
reverence. Sorry to interrupt you because we
Okay, yeah.
didn't treat it with reverence. Are you? I mean, like, no. Have you
Oh,
seen
yeah.
how
Okay,
racist
I
and
love that. Correct it.
colonialist
Yeah.
those catalogs were? No, no, no. So you never do that, regardless of how dated and how of the time. They were very dated, the catalogs. However, what you take from archives, and I do believe very much so that with Banana, with Esprit, and then with brands like Chanel and Louis Vuitton and Dior and so on, they were all innovators. They brought something new to the world. Lacoste, you know. So
Sure.
they always brought like some sort of innovation, which was either something that didn't exist before or something that existed but they did it in a new way. So in Banana's case, the founders, the Zieglers, they were Mel and Patricia Ziegler, a photojournalist and a writer, and they upcycled military garb into
Hmm.
safari gear. So that's the first innovation. You take one aesthetic, one kind of fabrics and materials, and you create something new. So that's the first innovation. The second
Mm.
innovation is to really create, to write down these fantastic stories about
Mm.
imagined worlds that don't exist. So Banana
Mm.
Republic for them was like Wakanda or Shangri-La
Right.
or Atlantis or like the territory that's not real, that doesn't exist. But they made it so rich that it
Mm.
became real. So
Hmm.
in that sense, that like the maps, they were nowhere. You know, you couldn't like, but it was always like, oh, if you turn around across the river through the woods behind the bush, then it's this. So they were so detailed and so specific. That imagination was so rich that when original Banana Republic created this unbelievable brand universe and much layered because there's stores. So that's second innovation, which is that story, that brand story. What is the brand about? Product, brand, and then third was the experience, the retail environment. Banana Republic did experiential
Yeah.
retail before
Yeah. They had a
experiential
truck in
retail.
the story. Like you would go in, it's like the jungle.
There was literally a jeep,
Yeah.
palm tree, a real palm
Yeah.
tree. Like, you
Yeah.
know, it was, so you walk in and you
I
walk
remember.
into this world. And yes, it wouldn't stand today because it was super colonial. And at the same time, if you look at it from the storytelling brand innovation
Hmm.
perspective, it was something that was, you enter the fantastical world. So when I first went into the archives, which are in New York, I believe they're still in New York on Thomas Street, and you just go and you look this like packaging that is in the shape of rhino or a lion or giraffe, and you can hold it like that. Like everything was so consistent,
Hmm.
and in that world, everything from the catalogs to the clothes to that packaging to whatever props they had, and those materials were unbelievable. They had photojournalist vest with like giant pockets. So our job then became, I didn't want to copy paste. That's not gonna do, because honestly, colonialism is colonialism, and racism is racism, no matter what age. You kind of don't want to
Sure, for
go
sure.
there. But what you do want to go there is to take that intention, those imagined world intention, and also the reason why brand was innovative at the time in its expression is not the same reason it may be innovative today. But again, that intention is there. So how do you translate intention from the 1978 to 2021, 22, which is when I was there? And what we did is literally take the archives, take the elements, see what are the icon products. Photojournalists wear vests, Gurkha pants, a button down. So you kind of identify the signature products.
Hmm.
Then you sort of modernize that idea of imagined worlds, and you have a family of models. We have like a group of models that we used for a year, repetition, repetition, repetition,
For
and they're
sure. Yeah.
always somewhere. And they were obviously very diverse and very, very modern in a sense, but also modern in a way that they were shot, which is this. I said this is going to work if it has an element of surrealism to that. We can't just be like,
Mm.
let's go on adventure. It will be like, no, that's not what you want to be associated with. But if you kind of add surrealist angle to that, so you have a boat in the middle of a desert, or you have furniture hanging from the tree, then you have like, oh, we are in imagined territory. Then adventure becomes
Mm.
something that's possible and allowed and acceptable. So you see how you have to be both sensitive to the zeitgeists and cultures, but also stay true to that innovativeness of those brands, because all those founders did create something that didn't exist before.
Okay, I love this so much because I think what you're doing is you're observing something about the world. So what Banana originally created was it took something and it transformed it. You talked about the military garb being applied to a safari, right? And so there's actually a transforming, so taking one form and putting it into a new context, which is how myth begins. It's
Mm.
actually at the moment of transformation. And so the other thing that I love about this is the observation of that myth. So when something is observed for the first time, and it's brought to the table as a net new observation, and then it's reobserved by someone else. Those are two different phenomenological experiences,
Mm.
and so when you start to get these observation upon observation, this is how you get the many, and like the myth, you start to see all the stories come together, and especially as people interact with the product, they're reobserving over and over. So they see the campaign, they interact with the product, they make it part of their story, and that transforms their life through that myth. C.S. Lewis said that is not mythopoeia actually the least subjective of activities? That is to say, creating myth is objective. It reflects our personal perspective and helps us make sense of the world in a way that's more true than perhaps even just the banal facts. And so I think I love this approach to how you build a brand, because I think it does come up against form and how to take a form and do something new with it. That's so cool.
31 minutes. Mark it. It took 31 minutes to get there. That's it's not bad. Not bad.
Sorry.
Theraflu kicking in. All right. Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit. We're talking about a cultural hit as an idea that captures consumer attention and drives engagement. But you talk about in the book that a purchase is not necessarily any longer the end goal of the brand's. It's not necessarily the only thing that the brand is trying to drive as the sole marker of having a means of success. getting people into a store to buy something is not necessarily the marker of success for something anymore. Attention is something that we're trying to mark as success. How do you quantify that?
Well, I think that I don't. I think still that the product purchase is important.
Well, for
That's
sure. Oh, yeah, for sure.
that's the business we are in. This is,
Sure.
that's how the industry operates, and you need to sell things. But I think that as a unit, you have to look as well as product purchase plus other things. And I'll tell you what I mean. I'll unpack other things because it's very vague. So I think that it became very operational, and which is a good thing, but I think it became very transactional, which is not necessarily a good thing when you work in retail, not just fashion retail, luxury retail, but you go any sort of sports retail, mass retail, CPG retail. It's not good to have that performance marketing. Let's buy X amount of ads that are going to get us X amount of clicks that are going to generate X amount of sales.
Hmm.
Because that usually means that you're not targeting your valuable customers. Very few of those customers are going to come back. If they came back because they were offered a sale or they were targeted as part of some other deal or right
Sure.
place, right time, or they were bombarded and followed around the internet and so on. So there is time and place for everything. So performance marketing works really well with brand marketing. But demand is created by brand marketing. Demand is harvested by performance marketing. So I think, in a sense, what is measurable is really interactions with the brand, which means, yes, you purchased something, but what is your average order value? How often did you come back? How often did you purchase? Did you tell other people about it? Do you come to brand events? Do you go to brand stores? How often do you come to the site? Do you open brand emails? And do you tell about the brand to other people? Do you follow brand on Instagram and so on? So all those are metrics that ultimately lead as a more valuable indicator of sales. When you unpack,
Hmm.
these sales came from a loyal customer who brought us 10 more people. They shop every month. And this sale is not all sales are made equal.
Yeah, it's interesting. I totally agree with that. I think it's what you win them with is what you win them to. And so there's a bit of I love the idea of demand marketers as harvesters of previous engagements. I think that brand engagement is the key thing. I I think you get into a lot of different interesting things about the creative class. So Philip, you were touching on this a little bit already, but I think that you said that being a Renaissance man or woman is a matter of necessity. To stay relevant, creators need to keep riffing. So I think this is really important as we think about uh, how to achieve engagement. You look at like how many similarities there are between mischief and liquid death, and like how they like liquid death pretty much has no paid strategy. It's almost all in-house original thought that they're looking to see, and they're looking to see what sticks. um how does that then, like, for like a more traditional brand, tie back to sort of the like hyper optimized demand marketing sort of like
Hmm.
almost data role that the chief marketing officer has become?
Well, I think that like both of those things exist at the same time. And but the thing is, if you think about the company, we said if it's organized like creative production. So imagine you have people who are in charge of product development. So for Liquid Death, that would be people who are deciding on flavors, and who are deciding on the texture and so on. In fashion, there will be designers who are saying we're going to use these materials, these fabrics, these shapes, silhouettes, colors, prints, patterns, you know. So they're product people. They're like merchandising people who are saying we're going to buy X amount of each of these because that the trends are showing us this is doing well, this did well last year, and you know, these competitors are buying this, so we're going to do the same thing. And then you have marketing people who say, okay, let's, how are we going to promote that in different channels? And you have retail channel people who are business people who are like, okay, how many of these I'm going to buy to sell on website, in stores, in wholesale, and so on. So in traditional retail organizations, all those functions sit separately. So now imagine bringing them all in one room, which we did at Banana at Esprit, especially at Esprit later on, because we built from scratch the entire US team, is basically it allows you to address a lot, to come up with a lot of creative ideas as you go. So the flavor can mirror the packaging, can mirror the activation, can mirror the channel, can mirror the price. So that you have that sort of like fast moving creativity, that controlled chaos. But then, of course, the machine needs to keep running. You need to do the business. And that's why you have product pyramids, you have foundations and collections and hero products. So with foundational products, of course, you just want to keep that machine going, and you want to buy as many customers as you have, and you want to buy as many purchases as as you can. But the thing is, the demand is built at the top of that pyramid through that deep reorganization. And the reason I took a step back is because basically the role of CMO is not just that. Yes, it's
Right.
absolutely necessary to be the data driven, but also merchandising and product is very data driven as well. And
Yeah.
channels are very data driven. So basically, every part of retail is it has to be very data driven because you're in a business of selling things. It's not like art
Yes.
school, you know, you need to sell things, you need to make them desirable, and you need to make them easy to discover.
The death of the CMO has been widely overreported. Is that it's kind of what well,
No, I know, but you know what? I feel like there's so many species and versions and variations, and like almost anyone can these days become a CMO or chief brand officer. But that's okay, you know. It's a big world, and you know everyone should do their thing.
that's great. That's going to be awesome on TikTok for two more days when before it goes away. Um, uh, One of the things that gets shared around a lot in our industry is how bad Zara's site is for usability. It's like, oh, if they just fixed it and made it, they could convert a lot better. Conversion rate optimization on Zara could be so much better. However, Zara is belongs to the world's largest retail brand. I How much does optimization really matter at that scale?
It matters a lot, but I don't think like, why do you say like I buy some, like I go to Zara app. So I don't necessarily, yes, I understand what you're saying about
Yeah,
Zara, but honestly, if people want something, they want it no matter how it looks.
yeah.
And you can make the best, the most optimized site. Yes, you can make some sales, but very few people are going to give up
Mm,
because they had to go to three extra steps to get something. So I think that maybe Zara has bigger fish to fry at this moment, although I don't can't really imagine because even in the US, their penetration of retail stores is unbelievably small
right.
regarding like US is their second market and it's all online. So they must be doing something well.
In the e-commerce space, and or in the let me say, in the e-commerce circle jerk, they like to take shots at Zara's e-commerce experience, and they talk about ways to improve it. People like to make mock-ups of ways that it could convert better. I'm like, I think they're doing just fine. They're doing well. Uh, I was surprised at the the amount of time that you spent in analysis on Zara's business in the book. I'm and I'm actually I was educated as to how expansive the strategy that Zara employs at all ends of the spectrum, and in collaborations, in uh, in I've thought of Zara, to be honest with you, as the American mall brand, which is a very inexpensive brand. So my exposure to the brand is a very narrow, limited uh, perspective. Um, when we're looking at it and we're analyzing it from a cultural perspective, how does Zara see it, and how would you analyze their strategy as trying to be a hit maker? Is that, and when they're explain it in the way that you explain it in the book, and how they've sort of intentionally positioned themselves to become a hit maker in the world?
I think I analyzed Zara in the book just to kind of illustrate the operational aspect of
Mm,
retail brands. In a sense, the business, the brand, and the product need to be in sync.
mm,
You can't just revive a brand by changing campaigns or marketing. You have to really change the product, the quality, the desirability of the product, the design, the silhouette,
mm,
and you need to really invest in your retail channels and understand what is the connection between those retail channels, what are your specific business goals for each, who are you attracting in each of them, and so on. So Zara was an example of someone who does that well. And Zara is a Spanish conglomerate. It happens to be in American malls, but it's also in so-called high street in Europe, and it's a fast fashion brand, although they recently peeled off from Shein, Temu,
mm,
like those, by improving their quality somewhat, the similar strategy that Mango is doing. Collaborations elevate the quality just a bit, justify a little bit higher prices, and have a better aesthetic point of view. So, I don't think that Zara is necessarily a hit maker at all,
mm,
but Zara amplifies hits. So, when Miu Miu's crystal panties show up, they're going to make the same thing. So, they're literally, by copying it, they literally amplify a trend. If what they see on the runaway is green, or I don't know,
I see.
short or oversized, Zara is going to amplify the hits. They're going to make them the hits because a lot
Mm,
of people are going to buy something that was on the runaway, something that
I
was a
see.
hit on the runaway. Yeah.
Oh, this okay. So this actually helps me recontextualize. This is the allusion to sort of the Henry Jenkins tie-in that you make, is the sort of participatory economy. Is that I want to be part of something that I otherwise couldn't be part of, and that I want to. So this is my elective way to participate. Is that they're giving me access, and that this is my way to be part of that. That's so
But by
interesting,
giving access, they also
right?
make trends bigger
Mm,
because a lot of more people can afford that little crystal shorts from Zara than from Miu Miu.
mm. It's the cerulean belt. It's the or what have you,
It's
right?
like however you want to basically call it, like that cerulean belt is more like how considered trends are or were actually,
Mm,
because these days it comes down really to the factories and the economies of scale, and they see that Prada is making something those under premium and mass. The factory is going to say, hey, if you want to make this, we're going to give you a better deal, smaller, so like a less price per unit.
So really, the hit makers need this ecosystem to amplify their story, to help bring the hits to be to the larger public. It's actually a healthy part of the process.
Well, I don't think I mean, yes, I would normally say yes, but I don't think it's healthy because in capitalism, you want to make money. So Miu Miu want everyone to be the only provider of the crystal shorts. And if you can't have it, you don't have it, but you want it. So, but based on what you're seeing, it actually works better for Miu Miu because some are going to be like, I'm not going to buy Zara, I'm going to buy the original, and I know I have original and so on, and you can never mistake the original for a dupe. Some dupes are like very similar, some dupes are not, but in any, it kind of, it's it makes trends spread much faster, but it
Mm.
also makes trends attractive for shorter.
Hmm.
Because if
This is
everyone is wearing the same thing, you kind of don't want to wear. That's snob model. I don't want to wear the same thing everyone else has.
oh no, I know exactly what you're talking about. I can be that way. Uh, Anna, this has just been such a lovely conversation, and it has been such a pleasure to meet you. We always sort of get to the bottom of the way a person thinks when we sort of ask them what you see ahead. Um, we typically say, what is the future of commerce? What is the future according to Anna Andjelic? What do you see out there? Um, what do you think is next in 2025, and what's out beyond that?
I believe more in evolution than in radical breaks. So I would say like a lot more people buying from people, because you see like first the taste making curation discovery since 2020, when I sort of first observed it brewing and forming itself, to 25, it became like a very strong shopping behavior and also discovery behavior, to go to tastemakers, to go to gatekeepers, to go to fashion substack, to pay for curated affiliate lists, and so on. So you went from one type of gatekeeper, which is editors, to those maybe same editors who are now on Substack, and who basically offer their point of view and their taste and their aesthetic filter to the world. So I think that that's again under that people buying from people, Depop, ThreadUp, Fashion Pile, eBay. It's all about that. It's not about the vintage products people are buying, but it's also about the sellers and their style. So I think that's even accelerating further, in a sense that we want human recommendations. We don't want an algorithmic recommendation that you see on Amazon and this is sponsored and it has this number of stars, and you just don't trust any of that anymore, really. You want someone to say, hey, Brian, or hey, Philip, go buy XYZ because you're going to
Mm.
like it and it's good quality. So it's like strategist or wire cutter and so on. But like imagine that going to micro sub niches and areas of retail that were maybe for running, for this, for that, for different parts, for CPG. I mean, there are services like that, but I think it becomes way more human.
I'm into that, especially for running. My coach used to recommend me some stuff, but I'm into like ultra running and
You need to
and
talk to my husband, because I don't.
yeah.
Don't do that to myself.
Yeah, I do some weird stuff. I'm into weird stuff, Anna. This has been just so lovely. What makes most sense? Where should people buy this book that benefits you the most? Uh, where,
I think the fastest way that benefits them is really Amazon.
yeah, for
They
sure.
can buy it on a publisher website, Routledge, but I would recommend Amazon. Just go to
Yeah,
Amazon, you're going to get it the next day. So that's
yeah,
great. And then obviously, Sociology of Business always welcomes new
yeah.
subscribers. And you can
Do it.
find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, the usual
Yeah, and
places.
become a
Awesome.
premium subscriber over at Sociology of Business every Monday. Also, where's the next book event, Anna?
It's going to be in London, and it's hosted by List on Friday, January 24th, but it's oversold. So
Ah,
they've been turning people off. However,
okay.
it's going to be recorded and it's going to be made available online in snippets, and then a full recording via email to those who registered. And then we're going to have a next one in New York in February.
Okay. Well, get us
Beautiful.
a list. We'll make sure to link all of that up. And also, there's a Hitmakers podcast that's a companion here. We'll make sure all of that's in the show notes. Anna Andjelic, what an incredible sit down with us. We've got to have you back. We'd love to have
Hmm.
you at one of our summits sometime too. We'll make it all happen. I'm sure we'll get you. All into the Future Commerce community. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to Future Commerce. And we love to have you speaking back. If you have questions, comments, you want to speak back about the Hitmakers book, we'd love to have you drop us a line at hello@futurecommerce.com. Hey, we want you to go grab a copy of Lore. That's our new journal from Future Commerce. Go get that. It's futurecommerce.com/lore. It's pre-orders are shipping now. Should be out in the next week or so after you hear this, and they should be in your hands. futurecommerce.com/lore. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Future Commerce Podcast.